she's a liar. She's either very, very stupid or she's a liar.
I think she's
because
both.
the Bank of England admitted what happened in 2022 was their fault. They've admitted that. They wrote a report. They said that 2/3 of the market movements were down to the LDI crisis. The day before the mini budget, they announced the sale of £40 billion worth of government gilts, queering the pitch. Even the New Statesman admits that it was the Bank of England who created the crisis. And if they hadn't done what they'd done, there would not have been a problem. That's what the New Statesman says. There's been a report in Bloomberg. The Wall Street Journal said this. Lots of credible and not so credible, in the case of New Statesman, sources have said all this. And Rachel Reeves just completely ignores it.
Right, hold on to your seats, because Rachel Reeves has just been absolutely demolished over what might be the most politically toxic decision of her entire budget. Nearly 350,000 foreign-born families could get extra welfare handouts because of the Chancellor's decision to scrap the two-child benefit cap. 350,000. And here's the bit that's going to make voters absolutely furious. Almost 200,000 of them are from just 10 countries. Pakistan, Bangladesh and Nigeria are set to benefit the most from this £3 billion giveaway, according to new analysis. So British taxpayers who are being hammered with £26 billion in tax rises, who are seeing their council tax doubled, who are watching their take-home pay shrink month after month, are now funding a massive welfare expansion that will disproportionately benefit foreign-born families who in many cases have never paid into the system. The political optics of this are absolutely catastrophic. Tory MP Nick Timothy, who carried out this research, asked the obvious question: you have to ask whose side this government is on, and that's the question every voter should be asking. Rachel Reeves is actively choosing to increase welfare spending while making working families pay the price. She's taxing British workers to fund benefits for people who've just arrived in the country. How did Labour think this was going to play out? Let's dive into this absolute disaster. Quick favour before we get into this political suicide mission. If you're watching this thinking this is absolutely mental, then hit that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of you haven't done it yet. It's completely free, takes 2 seconds and helps us massively. Cheers if you did. Right, let's talk about Reeves getting destroyed over this decision. So let's start with the basic facts, because the numbers here are absolutely staggering. Nearly 350,000 foreign-born families could receive extra welfare payments because Rachel Reeves decided to scrap the two-child benefit cap. Now, the two-child benefit cap was a controversial policy introduced by the Conservatives. It limits child tax credit and universal credit to the first 2 children in a family, with some exceptions for exceptional circumstances like multiple births or children conceived as a result of rape. The policy was designed to encourage fiscal responsibility, to discourage large families being supported entirely by the state, and to control welfare spending. Labour opposed it in opposition, calling it cruel and punitive, saying it was pushing children into poverty. And now they've scrapped it. At a cost of £3 billion, that's £3 billion of additional welfare spending every year funded by the tax rises Reeves announced in her budget. Now, if this money was going predominantly to British families who've been working and paying taxes for years, who've contributed to the system and fallen on hard times, many voters might grudgingly accept it. But that's not what's happening. According to Nick Timothy's analysis, almost 200,000 of the families benefiting are from just 10 countries. Pakistan, Bangladesh and Nigeria top the list. These are families who in many cases have only recently arrived in the UK, who haven't been paying taxes for decades, who haven't built up any contribution to the system. And they're now going to receive thousands of pounds in additional benefits courtesy of British taxpayers. Nick Timothy, the Tory MP who conducted this research, absolutely tore into the government over this. He told The Sun, "You have to ask whose side this government is on. They promised not to put up taxes after their first disastrous budget, which itself broke their tax promises made before the general election. That's true. Labour promised before the election that they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. Then they delivered a budget that raised £26 billion in taxes, hitting workers, businesses and employers. And they promised after that first budget that there wouldn't be more tax rises. But everyone knows more are coming because the fiscal hole keeps getting bigger," Timothy continued. Now they are actively choosing to increase welfare spending when they should be cutting it, while making working families pay the price. Actively choosing. That's the key phrase. This wasn't forced on them. This wasn't an unavoidable consequence of economic circumstances. This was a deliberate political choice. Rachel Reeves looked at the options available to her, at all the different ways she could allocate £3 billion, and she chose to give it to welfare recipients. Not to cut taxes for workers, not to invest in infrastructure, not to support small businesses, but to increase welfare payments, knowing full well that a massive proportion of the beneficiaries would be recent immigrants, and then Timothy delivered the killer line. And the beneficiaries, as this research shows, will disproportionately be immigrant families who have never paid into the system. Never paid into the system. Think about what that means. The welfare state is supposed to be based on contribution. You pay in through taxes when you're working, and you draw out when you need support. That's the social contract. But what we have now is a system where people can arrive in the country and immediately start claiming benefits, sometimes for large families with multiple children, without having contributed anything. And British workers are expected to fund that through ever-increasing taxes. Reform UK's policy chief Zia Youssef piled on, saying it is obvious from the data, even though a lot of it is hidden, that the primary beneficiaries of the latest Labour policy will be foreign national families, many of whom are not in work. Not in work. So they're not even contributing through current employment, they're entirely dependent on the state, and the state is increasing their benefits while taxing British workers to pay for it. Youssef continued, "It is totally unfair for British families and taxpayers to have to pay for that. You should have to put in to take out of our system. That principle, that you should contribute before you benefit, used to be fundamental to the British welfare state, but it's been completely abandoned." Now let's look at the broader context. Rachel Reeves used her budget last month to hike taxes by £26 billion. That's an enormous tax increase, one of the largest in modern British history. Businesses are being clobbered with higher national insurance contributions. Workers are seeing their take-home pay reduced through various stealth taxes. Council tax is skyrocketing in some areas. Energy bills remain high. The cost of living crisis continues. And in the middle of all this economic pain, where people are genuinely struggling to make ends meet, Rachel Reeves announces she's spending £3 billion to scrap the two-child benefit cap. £3 billion that could have been used to ease the tax burden on workers, to support businesses, to invest in public services. Instead, it's going to welfare payments that will disproportionately benefit recent immigrants. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended the move, saying it will lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And on one level, that's true. If you give families more money, they're less likely to be in poverty by the official measures. But Starmer is completely ignoring the fairness question, the contribution question, the question of whose side the government is on. British workers are being taxed into poverty to lift immigrant children out of poverty. That might be the morally right thing to do from a certain perspective, but it's political suicide. Voters who are struggling themselves, who can barely afford their rent and food, are being told they need to pay more taxes to support large families who've just arrived in the country. The resentment this creates is enormous and entirely predictable. A government spokesman attempted damage control, saying overall the proportion of universal credit claimants who are foreign nationals has fallen since October 2024, and we will consult on restricting migrants' access to benefits if they are not making an economic contribution to the UK. That's a pathetically weak response. The proportion might have fallen slightly, but the absolute numbers are still massive, and promising to consult on restrictions in the future doesn't change the fact that right now, 350,000 foreign-born families are about to receive extra benefits funded by British taxpayers. The consultation should have happened before the policy was implemented, not after the political damage is done. The political implications of this are absolutely devastating for Labour. They're already facing collapsing poll numbers, rebellions from their own MPs, accusations of breaking promises and mismanaging the economy. And now they've handed their opponents an absolutely perfect attack line. Labour is taxing British workers to give benefits to immigrants. That's not spin, that's not exaggeration, that's literally what the data shows. Reform UK is going to hammer this message relentlessly. The Conservatives, despite their own woeful record, will use it to attack Labour's priorities. And voters who are struggling will hear this and feel utterly betrayed. Right, that's how Rachel Reeves got absolutely destroyed over her decision to funnel £3 billion in benefits